Hi, welcome to the second video in my series on Anne Boleyn artefacts. Today I want to look at Anne Boleyn's bee necklace. I received so many questions about it. What happened to it? Did Elizabeth inherit her mother's bee necklace? Has the bee necklace survived? Are pieces of it in the crown jewels today? So I thought I'd delve into what we know about Anne Boleyn's famous bee necklace. And I'll talk about other items of jewellery that are linked to Anne Boleyn another day. Historian Nicola Tallis, in her excellent book All the Queen's Jewels 1445 to 1548 Power, Majesty and Display, explains how initial jewellery came into fashion throughout Europe during the latter part of the 14th century. And she gives the example of Mary of Burgundy, who's thought to have been given a ring by her husband, Emperor Maximilian I, featuring a diamond M. Tallis writes that the couple's daughter, Margaret of Austria, also owned initial pieces. Then we have Margaret of Burgundy, sister of Edward IV and Richard III, and wife of Charles the Bold. In this zoom-in on a portrait of her, you can see a bee pendant attached to the veil of her hood. B for Burgundy or Bourgogne. Tallis goes on to say that initial pendants became popular in the 1520s, peaking in popularity in the 1530s and 1540s, and that both men and women wore initial jewels and pendants, which they would attach to their collars or wear on necklaces. And that fits with Anne Boleyn and her famous bee necklace. And I think there's little doubt that Anne wore a bee necklace. Although all the portraits of Anne wearing it appear to date to Elizabeth I's reign, that would have been in living memory. So it was surely known that Anne Boleyn wore such a necklace. There would have been plenty of people to correct this if it was a misconception. Here are a few such portraits of Anne Boleyn. There is a theory put forward by historian Susan James that the Anne Boleyn bee necklace style portraits are actually based on an original portrait of Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary Tudor, Queen of France, and that the B stood for Brandon, her second husband being Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk. However, that doesn't make sense to me. Mary was never known as Mary Brandon, or even as the Duchess of Suffolk. She was always referred to as the Queen of France, even when she was the Dowager Queen of France. I really don't think Mary would have demeaned herself by making use of the name Brandon in any way. She always chose her higher title. Back to Anne Boleyn's bee necklace. As you can see from this zoom-in of the National Portrait Gallery portrait of Anne Boleyn, Anne's famous necklace featured a gold pendant attached to two pearls on a long pearl strand. I think it looks like one very long pearl strand that she's twisted and doubled, but it could be two. The pendant also had 3 drop pearls hanging from the bee. It is the same in all of that style of portrait. I really do feel that Anne owned this necklace and that the bee stood for Boleyn, a name that she was proud of. Unfortunately, we don't know the necklace's provenance. We don't know anything about it. Perhaps it was a gift from a family member. I'd like to think so. After all, it was a reminder that she was a Boleyn. But what happened to the famous Anne Boleyn bee necklace after Anne's tragic fall in 1536? Well, I'm afraid we don't know. In May 1536, Anne was found guilty of high treason and executed. Sir William Kingston, Constable of the Tower of London and Anne's jailer, was given £100 for a composition for such jewels and apparel as the late Queen had in the Tower. So Anne's belongings in the Tower, including her jewels, were inventoried and taken. Anne's bee necklace would have been a personal possession unless it had been given to her by the king, and so count as one of the Queen's jewels that belonged to the crown. However, as she died a traitor, all of Anne's possessions were forfeited to the crown, and so the king would have taken them. Nicola Tallis notes that we know that Henry VIII chose to distribute some of Anne Boleyn's personal belongings to the Lady Mary, his eldest daughter, the future Mary I. But the evidence for the fate of her other possessions is obscure. Well, I really can't imagine Mary being given Anne's bee necklace, can you? She really didn't like her stepmother. But perhaps she took it for Elizabeth. I can't imagine Henry thinking to save any pieces of Anne's personal possessions for Elizabeth. But did Elizabeth manage to inherit an A pendant from her mother? Well, this idea has been put forward by a few different people, including historian Siobhan Clarke, who's also a costumed guide at Hampton Court Palace. When she guided a group I was with a few years ago, Siobhan pointed out the necklace that Elizabeth is wearing in the family portrait of Henry VIII that hangs in the haunted gallery in the palace. This portrait was painted in around 1545. We all got as close as we could to the portrait without setting the alarms off, and the pendant did resemble an A, but it could also have been some kind of religious cipher or just a shape. It's really hard to know. Would Elizabeth, who would have been about 11 or 12 at the time, have dared to wear something associated with her mother for a portrait sitting? I'm not sure, but it's interesting, and I do hope that Elizabeth was given some of her mother's possessions. There is the idea that some of the pearls from Anne Boleyn's famous necklace ended up in the imperial state crown, along with other jewels like the Black Prince's ruby, which was owned by Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, eldest son of King Edward III, and also the Stuart sapphire. However, I personally just can't see Anne's pearls surviving the interregnum, if they even made it that far. The crown jewels were broken up and sold during Oliver Cromwell's time in charge, and the imperial state crown that we know of today dates back to only 1838, when it was made for Queen Victoria. Could Anne's pearls really have survived like the Black Prince's ruby? I really doubt it. As I said earlier, the Queen's jewels were crown property. And Nicola Tallis, who studied the inventories of the jewels belonging to Jane Seymour, Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr, notes that matching items found among Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr's queenly jewels confirmed that both queens had access to the belongings of their predecessors, and thus that jewels were frequently recycled. We also know that Henry VIII ordered Catherine of Aragon in 1532 to return the royal jewels that she had in her possession so that he could give them to Anne Boleyn for their forthcoming trip to Calais to meet Francis I. These jewels belonged to the crown, not Catherine, and Anne was going to be his queen soon, and so was to be given the Queen's jewels. It was the norm for jewels, like items of clothing too, to be passed on. So I feel that it is more likely that Anne's bee necklace, which became crown property after her fall, was recycled. I expect that the gold bee was melted down and used for something else, and that the pearls were used as a necklace or used individually to decorate items of clothing. I think that's the likeliest scenario, unfortunately. I just can't see it having been kept complete. Can you? I'd love to know your thoughts, so please do share them. And do you have an Anne Boleyn bee necklace? Or a necklace like Anne Boleyn's, but with your initial on? I'd love to know. For me, this is a special piece of jewellery, and I often get it out in May as I start thinking about the countdown to Anne Boleyn's execution. Well, do share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.